I'm here really as a representative of Dr. Funabashi Yoichi, former editor of the Asahi newspaper, who a few years ago, with the support of several key business financial individuals, started the think tank, RJIF, which is the Rebuild Japan Initiative Foundation. I think there had been a moment when he was about to end his tenureship as editor of the Asahi newspaper that he thought about some sort of think tank. And then, of course, the March 2011 Fukushima incident and the tsunami and the natural disaster in Japan. And the kind of incentive to quickly build up that think tank and then to investigate the causes behind the man-made accident at the Fukushima nuclear power plant were really the mobilizing force behind what pulled everything together and what got them the funding. And they produced the first, one of the first very important Japanese versions of an examination of how that had happened. And I think when you look at the government's own investigation and then the independent investigation done by RJIF, you get a sense of how much further they were able to go in criticizing officialdom, in criticizing really the structure of Japanese crisis management, if not in some ways Japanese society. And they went further because of their ability to be independent, and they weren't relying on government contracts, government relations, or relations that had been pre-established before. And when one reads the report, it makes for very chilling reading. Japan had isolated itself from general international trends of nuclear oversight and nuclear safety. It wasn't following protocol as other nations were, especially after 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, where many nations had put forth new protocols that should be followed. And the Japanese kind of, one doesn't want to say wallowed in their own self-confidence, but perhaps stagnated within a myth, a bubble, a mindset that they were different and that they didn't need to follow the same protocols. And so even though the Fukushima, the earthquake itself, and then of course the massive tsunami up in an area of northeast Japan was almost of an unprecedented scale, although they have seen tsunamis of those size every 100 years. The fact that Japan hadn't put in place protocols, procedures, safety implementations, and practice meant that they did not know how to respond to this unprecedented catastrophe. Part of the report, the Fukushima report, takes to task the government report where they talk about Japan's uniqueness and perhaps inability. And the investigation says, look, if Japan is so unique, then it shouldn't actually have nuclear reactors if it's not up to the task of doing it. So I don't think anybody is saying that it's something unique to Japan at all. It's just that Japan had allowed these oversights, these missteps, to continue for so long. And the question then becomes why? And that's one of the issues that first comes out in the investigation, and then we investigate more thoroughly in the Lost Decades book. The word accident doesn't actually cover the fact that this is something that's ongoing, that this is a problem that Japan continually faces today. Fukushima is not over. It began in March of 2011, but it continues today as well. And in some ways, this book, looking at aspects of how Japanese society arrived at where it is not looking at it saying that Japanese society is peculiar. It's trying to pull apart and dissect the anatomy of how it came to be as it stands. So why are the peripheral regions of Japan hollowing out? How does that affect the overall health of the Japanese economy? This is, of course, an economy that was touted in 1979 by Ezra Vogel as Japan is #1. It was going to take over the world. Japanese managers and management, that was the wave of the future. And then we saw the bubble crash. And then in the kind of late 20th and early 21st century, we've seen a Japan that's really sluggish in trying to internationalize, in trying to adapt to changes in not only the world market, but also in regional politics and the rise of China. And so many of these issues are tied together, and we try to unravel those threads. But in our discussions, one of the interesting features that came out was a constant comparison between Japan and other nations. And of course, traveling from the UK all the time to Japan, I was always very aware that even though we're talking about a Japan that's hollowing out, even though we're talking about a Japan that's no longer #1 economically, when you're on the street in Japan and you're in the major urban areas, it seems like it's thriving in a much more vibrant and economically powerful way than one could say perhaps for many cities in Europe.